what you're about to see is an interview I had with Todd McGowan on December 6th, 2023. It was the 1-year anniversary of Theory Underground, which is a course site that I built for both iOS and Android apps, as well as if you are just a regular web browser user, it's going to work for you as well. It's a course teaching site for theory and philosophy, but it also has deep end language immersion, weekly practice sessions, film club, social club, blah, 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 bunch of other stuff. But ultimately, the social media stuff is all downstream from the courses, which are all downstream from an overarching research plan. And so if any of this stuff is interesting to you, just understand that it's part of a much bigger plan. And I just wanted to kind of make my little plug for that, but you're all ultimately here for Todd McGowan because he is the one this video is about, because that 11-hour live stream from December 6th is too long for most people, so I am republishing the short segments. This is the segment with Todd McGowan. I hope that you will enjoy. Peace. Welcome, Todd. How's it going?
Hey, David. Good to talk to you.
Fantastic. We're already live. We were just we just came out of the PSA that we were doing, and I was having a conversation with Nance and Anne, both of whom you met on tour. But for anybody who's not familiar with your work, I just will take a second here to introduce you. Todd McGowan is the author of many very important books to critique of libidinal economy, as well as the amazing podcast Why Theory that he does with Ryan Angley. And he's rolling his eyes. I know he doesn't like to be talked up. He doesn't like to be talked up. Todd, it's not for you. I promise you.
Okay.
I would not stroke your ego. I know better than that.
Mute.
Yeah, just plug, take your earbuds out. Look, all I'm saying is that people should check out your podcast, that it's done a world of favors for the theory world, as well as for Michael Downs, myself, and everybody who's sort of fellow travelers with Theory Underground. And so today I wanted to announce, though, to the world that we are going into 2024 with a new course coming from Todd McGowan, and that this is something that Michael Downs has been fantasizing about for honestly years. He's always said that he would do anything for a course on Seminar 11 from Dr. Todd McGowan. And so we finally, well, he doesn't say that in personal, like one-on-one. Okay.
Gotcha.
Imagine him on the phone. Yeah, Dave, I would just love to have Dr. Todd No, he calls you Todd. But so I guess we just wanted to spend some time here to talk about this course, and we'll get into the details, the logistics of like when it is and blah, blah, blah. But first, I just kind of want to open it up to what is the significance of Seminar 11 in the work of, first of all, Jacques Lacan, and second of all, your own personal thinking and writing?
Yeah. So it was the first seminar that was ever published. That's one thing. So Jacques-Alain Miller talked to Lacan, and Lacan wasn't, so he never wrote I'm sure people that know a little bit about him know this. He never wrote a magnum opus. He never even wrote a book. He just wrote occasional essays that got collected in 1966 into a thing he just called his writings, his écrits. But Miller, it's the first seminar that Miller attended, and Miller talked him into publishing it in the 70s, like 73. And it was the first one that he published. So it's given in 63, 64, but it was, yeah, that's right. But it was the first time, so before Seminar 11, so seminars 1 through 10, he gave them at St. Anne, which is a hospital where he practiced psychiatry. It's a psychiatric hospital. But he got, so in 1963, he talks about this as he compares it to Baruch Spinoza's harem, like this being thrown out of the Jewish community that he was part of. So he was exiled from the IPA, the International Psychoanalytic Association, and he was at the same time exiled from his teaching space at St. Anne, so he didn't have a space to teach. And so Louis Althusser was teaching at the École Normale Supérieure. He found a space for him there. And so, but the caveat was that Lacan had to make it open to the public. So it was the first seminar that he opened to the public, and the banishment or excommunication happened after he started. So he had started this seminar. His seminar 11 was going to be called the Noms du Père, the names of the Father. But that got interrupted by this exile and being thrown out of St. Anne. So he said, I because I'm not a professor, this is how he put it, I don't just resume my courses after they start. So I'm gonna start a whole new thing. And that's when he called it the 4 fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis.
Oh.
And he started it in 60. I don't think it starts till January. So maybe it's in December, but he started it after in a totally new revised thing. And then it became, and then this, I'll get to why it was important for me. So not only is it his first seminar, it's also the one where he, I think even more than any of the écrits, he's bringing his thought together in a way, and also making it significantly more accessible to non-specialists, non-psychoanalysts, non-practitioners. So that's why it's important. And then I think why it's important in his trajectory. Philosophically, I think it's a really important intervention in the understanding of subjectivity. And I think that he had thought about subjectivity earlier, but he hadn't made it as thematic as he does in Seminar 11. So the 4 fundamental concepts are unconscious, drive, transference, and what's the 4th one? I don't know. I've forgotten.
Was it repetition or is drive repetition?
I think drive is repetition.
Oh, drive is repetition.
I can't remember, but I'll remember when I teach the class. But it's weird. I mean, even the choice is weird. So he doesn't mention subjectivity. He doesn't mention desire, which is, I mean, he mentions them, but they're not the fundamental ones. I think you're right. I think it is repetition. I think repetition and drive are separate because repetition comes earlier. I think that's right. Anyway, a lot of it is about the problem of subjectivity. So he introduces a couple concepts. So he's mentioned alienation before, but alienation gets our alienation in the signifier and in the big other gets much more foregrounded in Seminar 11. And then he brings out this other concept that he had never talked about before called separation. So the subject isn't just alienated into the big other, it also has the ability to separate from the big other. So that's new. So I think in a way, and the other thing that it does is it tries to think about, it's the time he theorizes most this idea of drive. Like drive, it doesn't really play the huge part in Lacan's earlier thinking or his later thinking. He has a 1A creed that's devoted solely to drive, but it's very short, it's 4 pages. So Seminar 11 is if you want to know what Lacan thinks about drive, it is the text. And it's also, I think, the text of subjectivity. So that's why it was important for me, and that's why I think it's important in general.
And that's why it's important for both myself and Mikey, because subjectivity is why we go to Lacan, right. And drive is largely why we go to him for subjectivity, right? So like these,
right.
It's like again, right. I used to just think of him as the thinker of desire, but once I understood the conflict between desire and drive, and that one can not be said without implicating the other, it's like, oh, he's a thinker of drive, and like.
Right, I think that's right. But so what's interesting is that drive kind of drops out and gets like from, I don't know, maybe Seminar 17 onward, jouissance enjoyment becomes the central category for him. I mean, the switch is in Seminar 16. So once he starts to talk about there is no sexual relationship, that becomes this mantra he repeats. Like up in Seminar 11, it's really our desire is the desire of the other. That's the mantra that's operative. And then the later mantra is really, there is no sexual relationship. So once that turn happens, then I think drive it doesn't disappear, kind of drops out, and when it gets replaced by just this central theme. If you did a word search, you'd find enjoyment and jouissance is like ubiquitous in the last seminars, whereas desire, drive are much more common in the earlier ones. And seminar 11 is in a way a hinge point, although the ones immediately after are still in that orbit, I think.
Perfect. Well, and I kind of wanted to ask a question about transference. I think people are hopefully at this point somewhat familiar with jouissance and drive. Folks, we can't always break it down. And of course, Todd will just call it enjoyment because he's trying to not make it sound.
Hate jargon.
Yeah, he hates the jargon. Yeah. But there are technical distinctions in there, and we usually unpack it. But right now, the one I want to focus in on is transference, because I think it's one that we talk about a lot less here, and it relates to the work that we do here at Theory Underground with critical media theory. And that being that there's a lot of talk online of the parasocial relationships that develop between the audience and we'll call them creators, because that term includes influencers, and I don't want to call all creators influencers. I try to not be an influencer. But in a sort of sense, you get put in that position, and there is something about that position that maybe has something to do with transference. Are you familiar though with the term parasocial?
No, I don't even know what that means.
Okay, so a parasocial relationship is where you are watching, usually it's a celebrity, and you're thinking like we would get along, we would be friends, and then you kind of think, oh, I know them, right?
But it's never realized. That's what I wondered, right? It's not realized. You don't actually like contact them and befriend them, or do you?
I think that some people do reach out to try to fulfill a parasocial relationship, and that a lot of celebrities suffer from people who become stalkers, right? And you get, for instance, Eminem's song "Stan." And it's all about one of his fans who takes Eminem's lyrics seriously and actually is like trying to be that himself, and is like, oh man, we would get along so great. And also I'm messed up, man. I do messed up stuff just like you. And from his standpoint, Eminem's like, obviously he's showing like, yeah, I've got a problem on my hands with some of my fans, but it's in this day and age now, with the micro celebrity phenomenon brought to us by something like YouTube, we kind of get put in that position. And I'm just wondering if there's any connection there to the transference.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what transference is trying to, the concept is trying to explain, right? Like, it's the idea in psychoanalysis is that but it's not just confined to this celebrity lust or parasocial thing. It's every love relationship, and not even love, I mean, every friend relationship. I think psychoanalysis would want to understand through the idea of transference, that transference means a transferring of the earlier relations, the earliest love relations, to later, and using that becomes the model for the later relations. So that's the idea of transference, and where Lacan intervenes on that idea is that this line of his, very famous line of his, that the big other does not exist. So he thinks that what happens in the transference is that you suppose someone to know, because that's the attitude that you take to the earliest love objects, right? Like you suppose, like, say I have a father, mother, like I suppose they're taking care of me. I say, I don't know, what is this movie good, or what should I eat for dinner? You think they know, right? You think, especially when you're little and you can barely talk, like you think they know. And then later you realize, well, they didn't really know that much at all, right? And so the similar thing happens in psychoanalysis, right? And I think also in these although I think the problem in the parasocial thing is you don't get to that point where you're like, well, actually my father was kind of an idiot, right? Like you don't get to that point, but in psychoanalysis, it's trying to facilitate that, right? Like it's trying to you enter into analysis because you suppose the analyst to know the secret of your symptom, whatever it is, or your disorder, right? And then you get to the part of the movement in psychoanalysis. You get to the end, and you're no longer relying on a subject supposed to know. Instead, you're realizing, like, I'm really the one who knows the truth of my own desire, the truth of my own symptoms. So that's in a way the passage. Like, that would be in a certain sense for Lacan, the psychoanalytic cure, right? But there's no such problem with this parasocial thing. Is there's no similar. I think that's what the Eminem. I don't know that song. I mean, I know who Eminem is, but I haven't heard any of his songs. Except for that, they're in that movie. I think I saw that movie. That
8 Mile.
Yeah, 8 Mile. By the way, there's a nice movie about this. Notting Hill has a scene where Hugh Grant is dating, I don't think they're dating yet, but he's seeing Julia Roberts, and her name's Anna Scott. I forget his name. It's funny because I've seen that movie 20 times. But his sister. She's the first time she sees her, she's like, "I've loved you all the time, and I think we're going to be best friends." Right? It's exactly the same phenomenon. Anyway, I think that there's nothing to stop, like what happens with this supposing of the subject to know. Like, you think, oh, Eminem knows me, and then there's never this desupposing of the subject to know. There's just this love. Lacan equates love that happens in the Transference with supposing the subject's supposed to know, and there's never a desupposing that happens, and that's what causes this, whatever you want to call it, like addiction to the person, right?
Right. And that the desupposing to know would be caused by would we say is the real?
That's analysis. Right. That's analysis, right? You're going through analysis. Like, it's similar thing that happens with a dream. Like, you tell a dream, Freud recounts this interpretation of dreams. Like, someone tells him a dream, and they want him, because he's this great interpreter of dreams, to tell him the secret of the dream. But he says, look, you work out analysis that only you know the secret of your own dream, right? Like, so it's a similar thing. Like, only you know the secret of your own disorder or your own symptom, whatever it is, right? And that's what you come to. And like, as you work through analysis, you're like, wait a minute, Lacan didn't really do anything for me, or this Lacanian analyst didn't do anything for me. I came up with that. It was my working through that got. And so so you realize that the analysis is sort of this unnecessary, and Lacan equates it with this objet, right? Like this remainder that can just be tossed aside. And that's what you realize that the analyst is, and that's the end of the transfer. That ends the transfer, right? But there's no end of the transference in these parasocial relationships, right? There's no how could it end? Because you never get to know them. I mean, it might end if you actually became friends, right? Like then I mean, I don't think I'm in this parasocial, but I have a lot of people that email me, which is nice, fine, and they quickly. This desupposing of knowledge happens pretty quickly. They're like, wait a minute, I could just figure this out, like Hegel, whatever. He's just saying this kind of obvious thing. So that, I think if you actually get in contact with a person, then the desupposing of knowledge can happen pretty quickly, I think. But,
right.
I mean, maybe not. I mean, I think a lot of people try to, and look, you're not even trying to do it, right? You're just unconsciously trying to sustain yourself in this position of subject supposed to know. So I think maybe it doesn't happen quickly, but it can happen, I think, if you get in contact with a person. But if they stay this aloof figure only known through their music or videos, then I think it's almost impossible to get out of that situation.
Right. Do you think that the fact that you are teaching Lacan, and that Lacan is related to analysis, and that analysis is related to psychology, and that psychology is related to therapism, and therapism is related to ego psychology, this whole chain creates the conditions for even more of that happening to you than it would perhaps to, I don't know, someone who's playing in the NBA or just a movie actor?
You mean You mean like a desupposing of knowledge?
Not the desupposing,
like
just supposing. the supposing, because it's like, oh, they got interested in psychology in the first place because they're struggling with something, and then they're like, they find youth in the process, and then eventually, do you think that factors in?
Yeah, sure, maybe. I mean, the only thing I would think, I think that's possible. Yeah, sure. Yeah, like I mean, I have people a lot of times say to me, oh, this is my, like, what do you think this means about my own psyche? I'm like, I don't, you should go to a psychoanalyst. I don't have any idea. Like, I'm not I don't know how to, that's not my thing. Like, I have a theoretical, knowledge, I guess, but not a practical kind. So yeah, I guess that's true. But I think people for whom that treat me that way, they don't treat me that way for very long, because it's not very satisfying, right? Because I just don't have any answer. The other thing, I think it's more, I actually think it happens less on a personal level and more on a political level. Like, people all the time will say to me, well, okay, this happened to me like twice last week. What kind of political solution do we need to art? I'm like, I mean, I'm just like, if I knew that, I'd be out like Bernie Sanders or whatever, right? Yeah. I don't, like, I'm not someone, I told a Lacanian analyst friend of mine that, and they're like, well, they want a big other. They think you're the big other. They think you're this subject's supposed to know, and you're not. I mean, no one is, right? Like, no one has if someone had the political solution, they'd be trying to implement it. And that would probably be disastrous anyway. So, I think it's more in that way, I think, than the personal. The personal has happened to me, but I think it's more often this political thing, just for the reason you said when you did that introduction. Like, a lot of my books are more about the political than about the personal.
Right. And the political, there is a distinction in the world of theory. I say this in my piece in Underground Theory. I think that it's, I don't know, my main piece in there, not the introduction. I say, like, as I see it, there's basically two kinds of theory that follows from Marx, because he did both kinds. And that was because he was theorizing changing the world actively. And he was kind of, it's like he's trying to change the engine and theorize the engine while the car is going, and he's driving it, like, so it's very much like he's doing both kinds of critical theory. But then critical theory breaks into one, which we could say is like, what is to be done, by Lenin, or something by somebody who's proposing a solution, as opposed to somebody who's like, wow, we keep trying these proposed solutions, applying this theory, it keeps not working out, back to the drawing board. And it's not a strict binary, but like, these are not mutually exclusive terms, but it does help me understand the difference between a lot of what gets called theory and a lot of what is like political theory, which would probably be better put as like polemics and strategy. And so, and I think a lot of people come into the world of theory through the polemics and strategy. And so then they think, well, of course, you're a politician or something.
Right. No, that's right. I mean, like, I would say someone like Slavoj is clearly on that latter side, right? And I don't know. I mean, Bernie, obviously, he's a politician, but there are a lot of people writing political things. And I think that distinction is pretty helpful, actually, between political, like, theory as such, and then political theory, right? Like, although Hannah Arendt called herself a political theorist, and she's much more on that first side, right? Like, she's not giving practical political advice. Like, that just seems like a different thing. And it's interesting. Do you know this guy, George Lakoff? He's a linguist. Yeah. And he kind of tried to, he was more in this, I mean, he was more just a linguist, but he was more in that theory group. And then he went over into like offering advice to the Democratic Party, right? Like, I just had somebody, I don't know, 3 days ago say, why aren't you advising the Democratic Party? I said, they don't want me as an advisor. I mean, that would be crazy, right? Like, I
think you would be really good as an advisor too.
I'd be a terrible advisor.
No.
I don't, David. I don't. have any sense of what people think or do. I mean, I'm a terrible people person, so I'd be a terrible politician. I just could never do any of that thing.
No, I don't mean an advisor for like, here's what we should do, but I mean like you're standing there by the throne and you say, like lean over. I don't think that's so for instance,
that's right. That's it. So that's an interesting distinction, right? Like, I think that's what theory mostly says. Like, that's probably a bad idea. Right, it doesn't have good ideas. It just says that's probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
So there's something deeply problematic about that, right? Like and even Marx, right? Like even Marx, like how much is there about like what society should be like? There's like a sentence, right? Maybe, and even that's never published. So it's really kind of, I think that's a deep problem, but that's the Hegel's idea of like the owl of Minerva takes flight only with the falling of dusk. I think there's some real truth to that you can't really grasp a situation theoretically until it's past. I was just listening to a German physicist today on this philosophy program, and she said, actually, every experience we have of another person is of the past, because in physical terms, right? Like like the time, the light even, or the sound especially, takes to come from you to me, I'm experiencing you in your past. And she says, so there's this idea, and this is a Hegelian point as well, although he didn't know modern physics, but there's no now, right? Like there's no now where there's no no relational simultaneity. But nonetheless, I think, so in a sense, like every political action is about the past, but I think theoretically it's even more about the past. Like you can't point to the future because there's not, that you're trying to make sense of something, but there's nothing yet to make sense of, right? And I think that this notion of I think Badiou is very good on this idea of the event, right? Like something happens and all of a sudden things are just, I mean, I think he's wrong to not think that those can be negative too. Like this thing that totally diverts things it can be terrible, right? But that, I don't think you can predict that. You can't see like, oh, that something's going to happen that's just going to change the terrain that we exist on, and that changing of terrain is what you then theorize, but you can't anticipate it. And I think that happens all the time historically.
Wow. Now this, I'm scared to ask this because it seems tangential, but then I'm like, no, it's not tangential. Okay, so the now, doesn't really exist. We don't really have access to it in this sort of sense. But it relates to self-help, business success, and especially like sort of like New Age end of the spectrum, the New Age spirituality end of the spectrum. When it comes to self-help, I'm thinking the most popular probably in that field being, or in that industry, being Eckhart Tolle and The Power of Now. And I'm wondering, have you read that book?
No.
Okay. So, I mean, basically your problems are imaginary. They're imaginary. They belong to the past, or, like the baggage you carry with you, or it's these ideas you have about the future, like what you want in the future. And obviously Buddhism, Stoicism, Lacan would all agree that, in a certain sense, like our desire is killing us, or like we beat ourselves up a lot because of it. But his grand solution is to just be present in the moment, to breathe. And honestly kind of sells it like, oh, I was poor and I was sad, but don't worry, I figured out I can just be in the present and now everything's working out. And of course they fly him to Hawaii to spend 2 weeks with a bunch of like people who make $500,000 a year. So he can like explain to them, don't worry guys, you can just be present minded. And
that's just Stoicism, right? That seems to me that's nothing other than some kind of version of Stoicism, which is, if there's anything that Hegel despises, it's Stoicism, precisely because, for the reason that you implied in the way that you described it, is that it's this retreat from the world that actually keeps the world just as it is. So whatever the oppressive situation is, it's just all you're doing when you do that is making sure that oppressive situation is sustained. The other thing, of course, is what I just was saying. Like, it's just a lie. There's no staying in the now. Like, you can't. It's just impossible, right? Like, I mean, I think of that Faulkner line where the problem with the past is that it's not even past, right? Like, it's not like the past is always there with you, even in this whatever this now is. Because there's no way you can insist on the now without being involved in the past that you think you're breaking from. Like, you got the idea of breaking from the past when you're doing it in the past.
Yeah.
So even by breaking from the past and staying in the now, you're actually violating the imperative that you're giving yourself, because the imperative has got to have come from reading this dude's book, which you did in the past.
You did it in the
so
past.
It's impossible. And I think that's why he's popular, because he's giving us, this would be my interpretation of it, super egoic injunction to people. They can never obey, right? Like, that's the whole point of superego. Like, and that's how you know, is this a superegoic command or is it just a law, right? Like, so, like, there's a speed limit outside. That's not a superegoic command, right? Because you can just obey, right? You can just go, the speed limit at my neighborhood's 20. I can just go 24. I can obey, and it's fine. I don't feel like, oh, I'm not obeying enough. I pass a cop, I'm going 24. I feel okay. Superegoic command, you never can obey enough. And that's why I think this live in the present is absolutely this superegoic thing, where the more you try to take it up, the more you feel guilty for not fully doing it, right? Like, that's superego, and that's a sign that this is a command coming from the big other that's forcing us to capitulate, right? That's pushing us to capitulate.
And this is going to be very counterintuitive for anybody who hasn't really thought about the distinction between the big other and the superego, because the way that traditional Freudianism has used the superego, it seems synonymous with the big other, right? And isn't it, you said Seminar 11, where Lacan...
Sorry.
Oh, no, your cat wants to be in the stream.
Cat. I know she wanted to be in, but...
She wants to be in.
I heard her, I think.
She could meet my cat.
I know, no cats allowed. It distracts me.
Oh, she's allowed.
So, no, so you're right. Like, this is a distinction that Lacan invents, that Freud doesn't. Freud has no conception of big other, right? He has no conception of it. I mean, there's implications maybe that lead Lacan to this, but Lacan really gets it from his understand. Well, I think he gets it from Heidegger, frankly. From I know you like Heidegger, and I think that you did a whole course on being in time. I think the idea of das Man, or the they, I think is really the central, which Heidegger steals from Kierkegaard and Kierkegaard's notion of the public, but I'll leave that aside. I think Lacan gets it from Heidegger.
You're right.
And that, I think, he turns into big other. So right. I think that this is not a Freudian so much. The other thing, it's a linguistic force. So it's also Saussure and Jakobson who are influencing that idea, although they don't have anything like big other, right? They don't.
Well, and for
nothing.
For Heidegger, Dasein's experience is composed of three mutually reliant things: the understanding, discourse, and state of mind, which is like your attunement to moods and the fact that you're always already attuned to moods. But that the discourse one is language, right? And so right. No, for Heidegger, For Heidegger, I know, right. He has a sense of language that in a way is parallel to Lacan's. I mean, Lacan, this is probably a sign that it is Heidegger's influence, that he was constantly denying that he had a Heideggerian theory of language. So that is probably a sign that he maybe did, and maybe Heidegger's influence is more important than Saussure's or Jakobson or Bonveniste or any. Yeah. I was just having a personal conversation with Andrew Flores of the Vanishing Mediators, and he's also one quarter of the Young Žižekians, who will be joining tonight for the film club discussion, by the way, everybody. But we were talking about this because I was saying, like, I understand Lacan's unconscious through Heidegger. That doesn't mean that I understand it as simply Heidegger, but it's more that he's a return to Freud through Heidegger. And once you've gone through Heidegger, there's certain things you can't unsee. But the difference there, I would say, is like for Heidegger, it's all based in use. Right. It's all based in, like words are not purely arbitrary. There's a use value. Like if you put, if you replace the turn signals on a car with like shapes that are like circles and squares, it would be a lot less intuitive. And so there's actually like there's a sense of onomatopoeia in the fact that it's a directional line or whatever. And Saussure does not like allow for that. And the thing is to Saussureanize Heidegger, though, is to say that they do become freewheeling. Like the signifiers do become, as Heidegger would say, uprooted. And of course, Heidegger thinks that uprooting happens through curiosity, ambiguity, and idle talk, which are the derivative modes of unconscious discourse and state of mind. Anyway, so I'm teaching Division 2. It starts January 6th. People are catching up right now on Division 1 and then joining for that. So, but let's get back to to Seminar 11. And so, yeah, people who want that distinction between the big other and the superego, people who want to think about transference, parasocial relationships, drive, pleasure, the tension between these things, like really, this is where it's going to be. And I guess I want to give you
David. I mean, Gaze is like your thing as a critical media theorist. Like that's his. It's funny because that's the concept of Lacan's that got most imported into film theory, but disastrously, right? As this idea of gaze is the gaze of the camera looking at or like us looking at the figures on the screen, or the cameras look and the spectators get whatever. All those are total. I mean, it's interesting. So that comes from the mirror stage essay. Most of what people think of as Lacanian film theory comes from the mirror stage essay, but where he never mentions gaze. The development of the idea of gaze happens in Seminar 11, and for him, the gaze is an object. It's a version of object A. It's a version of what doesn't fit within the image, not mastery over the image. So it's very different from that film theory idea. But there have been a lot. I mean, Slavoj, Joan Kopchak. There have been people who have tried to assert this other idea of gaze as a way to think about film, right? Or television, or whatever the medium is.
You also have a whole book on the topic.
I do have a whole book on that, right?
Yeah, right. Which I read at least the introduction, which was enough for me to discover, my plan is to actually go over the films in this and kind of read the accompanying, chapters with those films.
Look, I would never like pimp my own thing, but I think the films that I talk about in there are pretty good. Like I think that as a film, it's a little Hollywood-centric, but not totally. I mean, if I were to write another edition, which I never would do, I would put like a chapter on Kiarostami, a chapter on Korean. Like I would do some different things, but add some different things. But like there's a chapter on Wells. There's one on Spike Lee. There's one on Michael Mann. So I think that like the films that are there's one on French New Wave. It talks about most of the figures. I think there's one on Alain Resnais. There's a Lynch chapter.
Yeah.
So there's I think that it does like give a sense of like where this some understanding of gaze has been most conspicuously deployed in the history of cinema, right? So that and Slavoj's book that's most on gaze is called I think it's his only book that's out of print. It's called Fright of Real Tears. And then Joan's book, Read My Desire, has one chapter. It's the first chapter. It's called The Orthopsychic Subject, which is about the idea of gaze, comparing Foucault to Lacan, and saying that she says something like, I think this is an exact quote, film theory has performed a Foucaultinization of Lacan, right? Like, so that's that, and I think that's right. Like this idea of panopticon ends up uprooting the idea of gaze from Lacan's idea. So that's an important. I think that's a really important concept, and he gives the best examples of gaze in Four Fundamental Concepts.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting into it. I've tried to read this seminar in the past, and I'm looking forward to doing it with someone who spent a lot of time in it. So as a way of closing this out and setting ourselves up for the next interview, I kind of wanted to give you, we've got like, at least 10 minutes still to close down, but and I've got lots of questions that won't fit into this segment. One thing that I wanted to do was touch on something that Nance had brought up in the live chat, which he discovered. He said, I discovered Bergson through Tolle, Eckhart Tolle. True story, and I love Bergson. And knowing Nance, he always really appreciates any sort of source that brings him to something else. Like, and I do as well. Eckhart Tolle played a very important role for me at some point. And so this is what Theory Underground is actually rolling out, or sort of related to what we're rolling out, or I'm rolling out in January, which is really the beginning of my Timenergy seminar. I'll be talking about my book, Timenergy, as well as the chapters on Timenergy from Waypoint, as well as we'll be going over a lot of the source materials that inspired it or that I work with, like key concepts and thinkers like Marx, Heidegger, Adorno, Lacan, these various thinkers who've had some kind of contribution. Have you ever read that piece by Adorno called Free Time?
Yeah, I've taught it. Yeah.
Oh my, wonderful. Yeah. So like, obviously very inspirational for myself and for Michael Downs. Michael Downs was the one who originally put me onto that piece. And really, like, the only thing missing is like the talk of energy. And it's like, it's not something that I think Adorno really got to experience firsthand. And so he's kind of like ridiculing the idea of a hobby. He's like, no, everything I do, I'm fully invested in. And it's like, yeah, you've got like this reservoir of like this sort of energy that a working class person who gets off doesn't have. And so when he's critiquing the culture industry, he doesn't have like, he understands that he's privileged in a certain sense, and he says that in that piece, but he never really gets into the, okay, well, setting aside Adorno though, and setting aside all these other great thinkers, there's a whole culture around telling us how to manage our time to be successful, whether it's coming from a more petty bourgeois or PMC kind of rhetoric. I call it the spectrum of self-help to business success, and bringing that into dialogue with high theory is something that people disrespect. Out the door, people hate these kinds of books if they're into theory, because it's something that people say at Thanksgiving, you should read this and get a real job. Stop reading that Lacan stuff. So what we're going to be doing is called critical doxology. Right. And what I'm saying is that, I think that that's what you do with film as well. You are doing critical doxology, because doxa is obviously inherent to the way we watch film, which is to say we have a common sense ideological approach to things. But I'm saying the fundamental substratum of explicit ideology, not necessarily implicit ideology, though there's some of that, much less like the obscene underside, would be the spectrum of self-help to business success, because this is what you read when you're in prison. This is what you read when you go bankrupt. This is what you read when you quit drinking alcohol. Like, this is where people in my life always go to when nothing else on offer is like going to help them. They go and read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, and they're like, I need some rules. I need some rules right now, right? And I'm just wondering if you have what is your relationship to this kind of literature? Is there any of it, like, I don't know, that you ever read in the past? Like, I don't know, How to Win Friends and Influence People, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And did you ever read books like that, or have a phase like that? Or do you know people? Like,
I grew up, my dad loved Dale Carnegie. So I definitely have read that book. But I'm just dated. I haven't read anything since, except I read this guy, I even forget his name. He's the happiness guy, and I just read it in a critical way, but I don't even remember who it is. I don't have anything against it. I don't really, and I think you're right. Like, it does. There's a certain, like, there's a certain way in which that's expresses the doxa of today, right? I think that's absolutely true. And I do actually. I think, just like you said about the film thing, like, I think interacting with it is a good thing, like trying to see the way in which that's functioning, and how there might be like kernels of some theoretical point being made that they don't. I think that's what Slavoj was trying to do with Peterson when he had that debate, right? Like, he was trying to say, like, okay, where can I find some kernel of connection to these people that are attracted to Peterson? So I'm totally for that. And my only, if you're going to say, like, why don't you do that? It's just because of laziness. Like, or my own sense of of time, my own limited amount of time, right? Like I
wasn't asking.
I feel like
I wasn't asking that. I wasn't asking that.
No, but that's why. I mean, I just don't have if I had to think to myself, like, okay, read some, like the newest book on Hegel or read Peterson, there's just no context for me. Like, I'm just not going to do that. I mean, that's even true for me reading novels. Like, I've been trying to read through all of Dickens, and I'm kind of stalled out because it's hard to get to. For me, a novel is inherently less interesting, and so the same thing is true for me about the different kinds of self-help, that sort of thing. But for my family, that was a big thing. So yeah, when I was a kid, those were a lot of the books that were lying around the house.
Well, and even though you haven't read Eckhart Tolle, the basic idea being similar enough to Stoicism actually sets you up to still be able to say something about it. Same with this parasocial relationships thing. Like that is a trending topic, has been for 10 years. You know, you officially have like a basis for weighing in on that conversation because, parasocial reality, it's getting at the transference, right? And so to bring it back to Tolle then, who, like, on the one hand, it's like, hey, if that's your starting point into reading books, then welcome, and that's awesome. But also, as far as people who conflate, because of like some simplistic similarities, Stoicism, Buddhism, Lacanianism, could you say what the Lacanian critique of specifically Stoicism in its common conception would be? Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't, I mean, I think the easiest, I mean, it's just that for Lacan, so for Lacan, subjectivity is divided, it's lacking, right? But it's not just that, right? It's also excessive. And this idea of objet, it always manifests itself out there in the external world, right? Like, so the problem with the Stoic retreat from the world is that from Lacan's perspective, I think from the psychoanalytic perspective, you can't really retreat from the world because even the retreat is somewhere marked out in the world. And I think you were getting at that with this critique of the millionaires that go to Hawaii, right? Like that you're never really retreating. You're always
thinking is super uncool, and that's why
you're also doing something out in the world. And so I think that's what Lacan provides. That subjectivity isn't just. I think he's different than Sartre on this. Like Sartre, subjectivity is just this negating lack, right? But for Lacan, no, you're also out there in the world, and the idea of gaze is precisely that the point at which you're out there disturbing the world is what alters your vision. It's why you can't look neutrally on the world, but every time you look, you see a certain way, right? Like I look out my window, I'm drawn to a tree rather than just the blank sky. Why am I drawn in a certain tree, right? So you could maybe, I mean, it would be uninteresting. You do a whole psychoanalysis of why that tree is like maybe it's a foul. I mean, that would be the stupid thing, but maybe it's like a phallic thing that, like whatever. But that's Lacan's idea that the field of vision is always distorted, disturbed, altered, and so there's no retreat. So that's why Stoicism is for him just a lie. Like you can't do that. You can't have that. Like that. What is that? That alcoholics stoical pledge. Like I vow to accept, to change the things that I can change, and to accept the things that I can't change, and have the serenity or the wisdom to know the difference, right? For Lacan, that's just no way. Sorry, you can't, because you're always changing things that you are trying to just accept, right? Like that would be. I think I always identify that with like a stupid version of Stoicism. I mean, like a commonsensical version. Stupid for wrong one. But I think if you read, like, even the best versions, like you read Seneca or Aurelius or any, like, it always has this dimension of like there's certain things you can't change, you just have to accept. And I think for Lacan that there's just that pure acceptance is impossible.
That's really good. You nailed it, and you did it within the time frame. So thank you so much, Todd, for coming.
Thanks, David. Great seeing you, Nance, and good seeing you too. I'll talk to you I'll see people in July, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's right. So, folks, I've had it up on the screen for a bit. People who are just listening, you can go ahead and look at the screen. If you're listening to this on a podcast version sometime in the future, then just check it out. But basically, it will be July, every Saturday of July. The 6th, the 13th, the 20th, the 27th. And it's going to be at 11 a.m. in Pacific time.
For you guys.
Yeah. And it will be 2 p.m. for you, right?
Yep, that's it, David. Great to see you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thinking is super uncool, and that's why you should do it. It's just like almost anything that's like cool anymore. It just sucks. And I think that's like what the underground movement has always been about, is just like seeing what's in the mainstream, being like, it ain't there, and kind of like cobbling something together, you know? And yeah, it's a little mismatched, but that's like its beauty.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
We bring primary texts from leading lights of diverse fields to bear on topical issues and works popular in our current world. Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates of the attention economy.
Usually a good edited collection has good essays, but you only want to read a few. Every essay makes me want to read the other essays because you have a vision. Everyone that you invited for a reason. You weren't some fake publicist who's like, oh, so-and-so's a new book, have them on your show. No, you only talk to people because you've read shit by them, that you've thought about, that you think has value, even if you disagree. So I think that's what's amazing.
I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books, one, my book, Time Energy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of underground theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, you will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working-class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. Support at this stage of the operation is more crucial than ever because my savings were used up over the last year of getting this established. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels or a couple big time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. If you cannot afford it, but want to get involved with some of the stuff behind the paywall, I have made a financial aid scholarship you can sign up for here in the description. Quick side note, some people ask about the profit motive. At this point, I have not actually made a return on any of my investment in terms of the amount of time energy that I put into things, the amount of savings I've actually put into things, the opportunity cost of the work that I'm doing as opposed to the other kinds of things that I could be doing for money. But more importantly, I don't actually make enough to pay for my cost of living. The goal is to make enough for my cost of living, and then once that is achieved, everything over that amount is going to go towards expanding the operation to the point where I can hire Michael Downs, aka Mikey of The Dangerous Maybe, to be a full-time researcher and part-time teacher at Theory Underground. All right, so with that aside, I just want to say also, if you are a worker with earbuds, what's up? I see you. I work at Amazon part-time, and everything I do is for my past self who used to work there full-time. Most workers with earbuds couldn't care less about theory, but I do believe a working-class intellectual revolution could grow out of the underground theory scene. My hope is that what I have built here will contribute to making the scene something more than just a scene, and you into something more than just a scene kid. We're trying to make this into a real intellectual milieu capable of leading a way forward beyond the imminent crises facing humanity. But for that, we need thinking now more than ever.
Start thinking.
I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.